Let us welcome beloved Morya. In the midst of unfathomable tumult, I call you forth into your Christ consciousness to exercise the will of God. Throughout the nations, there are those that have not heard the word of God. They have not perceived the impetus of God good, and thus they continue to create havoc for the sons and daughters of God that would otherwise be exhibiting more of their Christhood and would be galvanized to the heart of that will of God. You blessed ones who attend my voice, my flame, and my consciousness in the full regalia of the will of God, streaming forth from the heart of God, the One. I commend you for having the fortitude, the courage, and yes, the stamina to stay the course, to have the clarity of consciousness, to understand how you must maintain the vehicles of consciousness, to be even in my presence. For there are many that would scurry the moment I enter the room, for their vehicles of consciousness so rebel in the outer form to that will that is the natural inheritance of the pure God reality at the core of their being. So as quickly as they can, they run. But you, on the other hand, run to the flame of God. You desire to be consumed by that flame, to have it course through your vehicles of consciousness, to have every cell of your being resonating with that divine will, and having all of your vehicles of consciousness aligned within the heart, exercising the oneness of God in all of life at every turn. There are many initiations that you must go through even to reach this point of awareness that you have garnered at present. Lifetimes after lifetimes, striving mightily, wondering if there was ever an end to what seemed to be so far off in the future of realization in your life. But you, blessed ones, have stayed the course, and you have held fast. When you have a greater discipline of your outer vehicles, you will have a greater acceleration. And then there will be a new plateau for you to realize. Having thrust into your conscious awareness the realization, the actualization of the presence of God, you have a greater opportunity to avail yourself of more momentum in God consciousness. For now that you have drunk in a certain quantity of God consciousness and the quality of the perfection of those ascended and cosmic beings that have brought forth their gifts for you, imparted so that you might have a taste of the experience of what you have to look forward to throughout all your days. This, blessed ones, is a great dispensation indeed. Perhaps it has not been spoken, but let me proclaim for you, this has been a dispensation that we have desired to bring forth for over 100 years into the outer consciousness of mankind. Since the inception of the Temple of the Presence, it was known from the beginning that the groundwork had been laid, the foundation was firm, and the causal body momentum and God consciousness of the anointed representatives that stand before you have the attainment to grasp the infancy of that natal birth of the consciousness of God that is inherent within the One, and thus draw it forth at our command, so that you might have an even greater outpicturing of the story of the Godhead charioteer. For it is not enough to know where you are going, but you must understand where you have come from. And when you have the fullness of that understanding, you realize that it is a divine circle of life without ending, and certainly without beginning. And on it goes, as it is charted by the will of God. As the Chohan of the first ray of the will of the Most High, I hold within my consciousness that engram, that form that is fashioned by the power of God, streaming forth in all of its perfection, commanded by the mind of God, and held firmly within that directing intelligence of the consciousness of the mighty I Am, the great I Am, the One. For from the beginning it was known that these rays of God consciousness would be delineated for your understanding, so that you could begin to qualify and quantify in your outer vehicles all that was required to bring about the creation of form, the fashioning of the likeness of God, and the understanding of the conveyance of the consciousness of God through your vehicles. How many have come close to that flame and determined that was the most precious place of all to be, and never once look back, did not have a second thought as to what if, or perhaps, for there was no shadow of turning ever to cross their gaze again. The presence of God was all there was, and all there would ever be. And that was all of life to them. Blessed ones, that is a life stream that has entered into the stream of consciousness of the will of God. For that one has known in every vestige of their being the presence of God streaming forth in that perfect divine order of all things in their life. In that will they perceived love, the perfection of purity, the divine intelligence of God as the mind of God. And all things began to fall into place for that life stream, and life was no longer a needless journey in the wastelands of human creation, but was productive in the Christ consciousness, enriched by the benevolence of God, held within that power of the will of God, so that all things would maintain that divine outpicturing of the vision held by the I Am presence for that life stream. Perhaps you think that is a story made up out of nothingness. But that is the story of my life. When I finally discovered the will of God, there was no place that I would rather be, no current of God that I would rather serve on, no desire of my heart that I would rather give the sons and daughters of God. And from that moment on, to this very time, that has been my mission. I am not alone, for there are those that have experienced that same love of the will of God. Likewise, there are those of many of the God qualities, many of the rays of God consciousness that find their place, their home, that their God presence has determined was the right place, the right vibration, the right service to God in life. And thus, they too took up the charge and established themselves in the fullness of the trek to outpicture the highest quality of that ray that was possible at all times? Have I addressed your life yet? Have you found home for you? Have you established enough clarity of consciousness within your life, clearing away the debris of the chaos of human creation and the riptides of thought and feeling pounding away at you so that you could be centered within the heart and recognize what is home for you? Home is the intonation of the Om of your own mighty I Am presence. That is when you have arrived, and it matters not how many life streams utter the Om. Each one has its own unique God identity vibrating through it and establishing throughout each of the planes of consciousness of that one the identity of the mighty I Am presence. And when you know that tone, that vibration in the Om, you are home. It is very good to be home, for there you find the surroundings about you that are familiar, but they are not filled with the talismans of unreality, but of those that have the perfection of God. They have the full vibration, resonance, and vision that your God presence beholds itself from within out. So if you are being true to the will of God, you are drawing upon that divine nature of your own God presence and calling forth that home so that there is no longer the requirement to be in a foreign land, a foreign waste, where there is only unreality. Once you have arrived at the place called home, the vibration that is home, the intonation that is home, your own God presence is right where you are. And that is when life begins to matter. For yes, blessed hearts, the rest has all been building up to that moment. For then you have the capability of performing the works that your mighty I Am presence has desired. Did you think for one moment that your presence came into incarnation through the threefold flame of your heart merely to move about aimlessly until somehow it gravitated to the awareness of God? Your mighty I Am presence has those things of the world, of the waters, of the air, of Akasha, that it desires to move within as the mind of God, appropriating, fashioning, forming, and achieving, testing out each of those planes of consciousness. You are merely wearing those elemental forces of nature as bodies so that you can be the charge of the mighty I Am presence in each of those respective planes by the spiritual centers of your being, activating on those planes of consciousness as the threefold flame begins to command, and with greater acceleration, there is a greater service, greater creativity, greater mastery. So you see, blessed hearts, many of you are nearing that cycle, if you have not already, where you can begin to apply the pressure of the will of your mighty I Am presence into the endeavors that your presence has desired. Not that your outer mind has conjured. No, blessed ones. For most of the conjuring of the outer mind comes from the cesspool of the astral plane. Or worse yet, lower mental bodies that vibrate just a level above what the animal instincts have already achieved. We are talking about Christ consciousness, not the mass consciousness that is always leveled to the lowest common denominator, unless there is enough of the pressure of the will of God as a fountain of light, elevating that consciousness into the fullness of all that is required. So if you think for one moment that the ascended masters, most assuredly the Chohans and the Mahachohan, expect more of you, you are absolutely right. For you have the greater opportunity. You have been given the fullness of all that is within that ability, according to the karmic board, for us to teach, to instruct. And therefore, we do expect more. We do demand more. And if you think you are stretched, just in thinking you are stretched means that you have more that you can be stretched within. For blessed ones, you know not the resilience of your vehicles of consciousness. Those who have a tendency to constantly complain and bellyache about this or that are not exercising the will of God. They do not understand from whence comes the surcease of their pain, their fatigue, their slothfulness. And therefore, I commend you back to your altar to find yourself, your true self, so that you will have a greater resilience, stamina, and fortitude for the journey. The ascension will not be handed to you merely because you show up. You must apply yourself. And as with my life stream, once I had entered into that flame of the will of God, there was no turning back. There was no other life for me. It is my desire and my hope for each one of you that you would have that experience sooner rather than later, and that you would hold fast to it, not letting go for one instant. For that in itself will be an initiation of the will of God pouring through you. And it matters not what ray of God consciousness. You will be required to have the will of God in order to recognize it. I speak of that for those who shy away from the blue flame of the will of God. For you cannot skip it for any reason, for any God quality, any more than you can skip over God love, or God illumination, or God purity. So you see, blessed hearts, it's time to be committed to the truth of your divine being, of the mighty I Am presence. And as you take hold of more of the ideal of your own mighty I Am presence in your life, that will begin to telegraph out through the earth. And as I began, there will be those in other countries and other lands upon the earth that will awaken in time. For many of them will be brought into the proximity of the flame of God, either knowingly or unknowingly. It matters not. What matters is that they feel the stirring within them, and they draw it forth just as you would draw forth the sword Excalibur to glean in the sun, shining forth the truth of God. And when that truth is exhibited in the land, many will know it. Many will recognize it and ratify it. This is why we have desired to draw together life streams whose divine plan it is to be galvanized into the outer activity of the ascended masters, so that together the many hands, the many voices, the many heart flames of God can complete the work that must go out far and wide. Do not think for one moment that one individual out on their own is going to light the world up. It takes the multiplication of the flames of God. It takes the foundation of the entire spirit of the Brotherhood of Light, moving as one unified action to bring about all that is required, not only for the ultimate victory of the Golden Age, but even in this era, to bring about enough of the surcease of cataclysm and warring, of those failures of governments that must be squelched, and those blessed ones that must be raised up, that have enough of the presence of God upon the altar of their heart that they can occasionally be reached by our cosmic councils to more effectively lead. This is the work at hand. And you are either with us or you are on your own. But do not bellyache when you find the going gets tough and you have no El Morya or Saint Germain to lean upon. We are a force to be reckoned with. And when you have the entire spirit of the Brotherhood of Light in a concerted divine order from Alpha and Omega, You can rest assured that the victory will come, but it will not come without those assisting that have vowed at inner levels to commit their life and all that they are and the fullness of the Christ consciousness to the work of the ages. I expect this address to go out far and wide. For you, blessed hearts, who sit before me this night, are not all that I speak to. For the consciousness of Elohim, mighty victory of the Karmic Board and the Darjeeling Council have weighed in on this address with their points they desired for me to bring forth and to galvanize in the fullness of the will of God. I trust I have been articulate enough so that the message would not be lost and that you would galvanize every erg of energy of this release to draw unto you the sword Excalibur so that you could be the one to stand for the entire spirit of the Brotherhood of Light and say, with your grand and glorious proclamation, I am the will of God. I proclaim the will of God. And in that will of God, I am God victorious. I am the will of God. I proclaim the will of God. And in that will of God, I am God victorious. I am the will of God. I proclaim the will of God. And in that will of God, I am God victorious. As you go forward, making this proclamation, let it be known far and wide that you are disciples of the mighty I Am Presence and the Ascended Masters. And as such, your voice counts. The flame upon the altar of your heart is ablaze with the fire of God, and it will not be denied. I, Morya El, as the angle of God consciousness, of the will and the power of God, commend you to your victory.